Well, good day, everybody. Glad you could join me today. All right. Winter time is a very good time to plan for your garden. So, basically, what I've done is last year, prior to harvest, I just made a note of things that I would like to plant in the next few years. So, for my 2023 garden, I just wrote out a bunch of vegetables and squashes and stuff like this, and different types of yellow beans, rattlesnake beans. But what I got to do also is when I do all this, then I got to research it to see what zone they grow best in. And then once I establish that, then I plan out my garden. But I only plan my garden to what I harvested that year and what I canned and preserved and all that and the quantity we have. So I just make a bunch of notes on what I have. As you can see, I put a bunch of question marks because I don't know if I'm going to plant them again or whatever. Like I planted butternut squash, buttercup squash. I planted spaghetti squash, stuff like this, right? So right now I looked at my leeks. My leeks did pretty good. I did not have turnips or beets, but I'll probably grow some this year. I ended up with a lot of dill pickles, bread and butter pickles, so that was good. Out of all my yellow beans, I did very, very good on my yellow beans. Like we ended up probably harvesting 6 times before the plant. Well, when everything froze up, I still had flowers on my plants when I finally pulled them out of the ground. Stewed tomatoes, I got lots. Peppers, well, that's without a doubt. I plant them every year. I love peppers. 2022, I did all my hot sauces and stuff like that, and my jellies, my habanero jellies. I'm going through them like hotcakes, so I'll be planting more. Straight 8 cucumbers, and so I like them. So that's what I'm doing, right? I'm planning my garden. What I need to what I've already had last year, and that's how I judge everything. So I just write things down. Then what I did is I made a blueprint. So basically the bottom was the layout of my garden last year, right? My strawberry plants, and then I had a bunch of tomatoes in my strawberry plants. Then I had my leeks and my lettuces and my dill weed and all that, my parsleys. I had my celery, which gave me nothing but issues. My yellow beans, my tomatoes. Then I had all my trellises. I had my peas, and 3 of them were cucumbers. So I had 4 trellises. So that's what I grew last year. And then in my square garden up here was all my zucchinis and all my squashes. So that was okay. Then my 2 raised beds here, my little hothouses, I had all sweet peppers in one, and then I had my all hot peppers in the other. Okay, so then that was my garden. So now I turned around and I said, okay, so what am I going to plant this year? And remember, I discussed all this last year. Even before I harvested the garden last year, I drew all this out. So I said, okay, I still got my my strawberries in my raised bed, so that's going to remain the same. But I said this time I want to do my carrots, my onions, my yellow beans, and then I was going to do more peas, cucumbers, and then I was going to do more dill cucumbers. But I wanted the little wee ones that are very small, and they got the bumpy skin and all that on it, so I wanted them. My watermelons, you know what? For the amount of time and effort that I put in them, and we ended up getting only 8, and out of the 8, we only had probably 4 good ones, and the other ones just never, they just never grew good enough. You know what I mean? And then after that, once we hit the frost, well, then that was it. And I cracked a couple open, thinking I would eat it, and there was no way. So it was just a waste of time in this area, as far as I'm concerned. I grew it, so that's I'm not growing it again this year. So I just planned all this out, right? So then, what I also started doing is I started looking at all my peppers and trying to figure out on the planting time, like the germinating of the seeds, getting all my seedlings ready, keeping them nice and warm, bringing them in and outdoors, and then after I plant them, you know, how many days is it going to take for my harvest, right? So I keep track of all that, and then I also keep track of all my seeds, like germinating period. How long does it take? Like 7 to 14 days on certain veggies and stuff like this. What's the soil temperature got to be? What's the optimal temperature? You know. So I keep track of all this. Then what I do is I go by 2022, and remember 2022. I planted June 18th, but then I ended up with 3 days, the 19th, 20th, and 21st or whatever, heavy frost. And I'm telling you, heavy frost. It almost destroyed 80%, 90% of my garden. So, you know, I had to buy some more plants to kind of make up to all the ones I lost. It was a very frustrating start to last year. But then the harvest at the end paid off. But man, it was a rough start. So what I did is, again, I chose June 18th, but that there is just to give me a ballpark on my germination of my seeds and stuff like this. So I took June 18th as my planning to plant, and then I back up. And as I back up, I'll back up 12 weeks, 14 weeks, and 16 weeks to figure out when I'm going to start to germinate all my seeds. Okay? So also my 2 raised beds, my hoop beds, well, they're covered with a double plastic. So I went from like a zone 3 to like a zone 6 or whatever it was, 6.5. And that's like a little greenhouse. So it doesn't matter how early I plant, I just got to, or how early I start germinating my seeds, because once I start getting all my little seedlings starting to grow and stuff like this, then I can start to monitor it, and as they're growing, I can put a fan behind it to keep the plants moving, you know, for so long every day, and that'll strengthen it up. But then once the plants start to grow very well and they're on their second, third, fourth set of leaves, well, then I could start putting them inside, outside to get used to the temperatures. And then after that, then what I can do is open my domes of my 2 raised beds, put in all my trays, not plant them, but just put all my seedlings that are growing in there, close it all night long, and then during the day, I can just kind of put it like a 2x4 inside them so that I still have some airflow in them, because the plants are only going to be so high, right? So as long as I got airflow in them and I still got them partially covered, it'll start heating up the soil. And once the soil's heated up, well, then it'll start growing. It'll make it a very controlled grow, right? So you got to think about that now. How you're going to do that, what you're going to plant, and when you're going to start germinating, you know? So this here, like I said, I did this here last year before I even harvested my other garden, okay? So I did that. Then again, I kind of just threw a bunch of vegetables down and kind of looked at that and said, what do I want to plant? What don't I want to plant? Then, so what I did is I drew out my gardens, right? Again, I still have my 2 raised hoop beds. That's still going to remain all my peppers, because that's what I built them for, just for my peppers. I still have my raised bed with my strawberries, and I got my chives in the 2 corners here Well, that's going to remain the same. Okay, there's going to be no changes there. All right. Now this here bottom part here, which is 14 by 16, that's where all my zucchinis were, and all my spaghetti squash, butternut cup squash, and all that was all in here. Well, because I'm eliminating that, at first I was going to put it on, then I was going to plant, then I started to eliminate it. Then I said I'm only going to put 4 zucchini plants, just for stir fries and soups and salads. And then I was going to put all my beefsteak tomatoes on here. Then I was going to have my cabbages. I was going to plant a whole bunch of cabbages, my dill weed, my Romanian lettuce. And then on the top here, I was just going to plant some of my garlic in the fall. And then what happened was, is I drew out my plan, right? Again, I got my carrots, onions, yellow beans, but instead of having the 4 trellises, I only put 2 up for my peas, some straight 8s, my dill pickles, and then my watermelons. So that's what I planned last year. And also started talking about different types of plants, like annuals and all this. I can't put perennials because, I till all my garden, right? So that's defeating the purpose. But even though I till all the gardens, I can still put my perennials or my annuals and plant them because it doesn't matter. But I need to do that to attract the bees and to get all my pollinators in, right? So I was thinking of that. Now, also, I put it together and then I started to sleep on it and fine-tune my garden. So I already got a blueprint of what I want. All right? So now I got that. I throw that aside. So now comes the time of actually planting my garden. And that's what you do right now. Okay? It's winter time. It's February. So now it's getting close to the time where you got to start germinating your seeds, planting your garden, and doing all that. All right? So that's what I'm doing here. So again, this is my raised bed here where my strawberries are, so that's not going to change. And these are my 2 raised beds with the hoops. And again, like I said, that's not going to change. That's going to be my peppers. But last fall, I went out and I bought garlic bulbs to plant. And I was only going to plant some in this small little section here, like 20 plants or something like that. And I really thought about that and thought about that and thought about that. And the wife and I go through a lot of garlic, a lot of garlic. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to do the whole 14 by 16 garlic. So that's what I ended up doing. And I also put a video out last fall of me planting all the garlic. But right now I cannot use this garden for anything else until after late July, because in late July is when I harvest all the garlic. So from late July all the way to October, this bed will be empty. So I have to figure out what else I'm going to grow in here. Then the main body of the garden, I had to figure out right now before actually germinating seeds to see what I actually want. Yes, I already made a blueprint, but now I'm putting it together because now it's going to be the final blueprint because I'm going to start germinating. So what I did is I made my final garden. So now this is going to be my final garden this year for 2023. All right. I'm still going to try and plant for June 18th, give or take a few days, judging myself on the weather. Now I got tarps, I got heaters, and I'm a lot more prepared now because last year when I started off and I got nailed by the frost, I ended up having bed sheets all over my garden that the wife and I have had for over 25 plus years. And that's what we used to do. we used to put all our tomato trellises up and then lay the sheets over top and put a bunch of clothespins and hope it's not a windy night. But you know what? That worked for us for like 20 something years, right? And there was no cost except for old bed sheets, you know what I mean? And you can get them for next to nothing. It's sometimes you can get a whole bed set, bunch of sheets for like 20, 30 bucks. And that worked out pretty good for us. But because of what happened last year, it was just really windy, really hard to control the frost. And then I went out and bought an actual tarp, and my tarp was big enough to cover the entire garden with no issues, and also to cover up my other small garden. And my 2 hoop beds, all I did was close my hoops down and kept that. My peppers did really well, but they all froze in the first 2 days when I had my all my pods in trays all laid out in the garden ready to plant. So this year, what I'm going to do is I'm still going to have my strawberries. I'm going to still have my 2 chives in the bottom here. But then I took the remainder of my garden, which is 40 by 12, and I divided it into sections. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections. All right. This here's all going to be my strawberries. That's fine. But instead of having 4 trellises here, because I had 2 here and 2 here, then I had my tomatoes and my beans and then my celery and all that, I only went with 2 this year. All right. So one's going to have my straight 8s and my English cucumbers, and that's for everyday eating. And then the other one's going to be my Kirby cucumbers, and them are them like little green ones with a thick skin, and it's all bumpy. And I'm going to make garlic, and I'm going to make like gherkins, sweet, and I'm going to leave them whole. That's my plan for this year. Even though we got a lot downstairs, I want to make some more. All right. Now, we are eating a lot of my Arbanero jellies and my jams. Whenever we have chicken and whenever, we're just eating it with everything. It's just so good. It's the best I've ever made. So I decided I'm going to take my first raised hoop bed here, and the whole thing is going to be nothing but Arbanero peppers. That's it. That's all I'm going to put in there. Then my second raised bed, I'm going to take 2/3. See, I got it divided into thirds. I'm going to take 2/3 of it, and I'm going to plant my sweet bell peppers, but I'm going to plant the yellows. And the greens, I'm going to keep them in there until they turn red. But it's going to be yellows and red in 2/3 of that. Then I kept 1/3 of my raised bed, and in there, I'm going to plant my ghost peppers. Okay. And then Carolina Reapers, I'm going to plant some of them, and then Scotch bonnets. Like Scotch bonnets and Arbaneros are almost the same, but Arbaneros is a little bit sweeter. But I find sometimes the Scotch bonnets will add a little bit more heat, but the ghost peppers will give you that numb tongue. So whenever I do my jellies, I'll put in the Arbaneros and the Scotch bonnets, but I'll also mix a little bit of Carolina Reapers, and I'll throw in some ghost peppers for that real hit you after heat. I like it. So that's my plan here, right? So I'll still have my carrots this year. This year I'm going to put all my carrots in. I'm going to put onions this time because we're running out of onions. We're going to be out of onions probably before my garden season even starts. So I'll have to buy onions because we take all our onions, almost 90%, 95% of our onions, we dehydrate it and we put them in jars. That way we don't lose nothing. We don't have many left. Yellow beans, well, we love our vegetables and we love yellow beans. So we're going to plant as much as that. Beefsteaks, I got to have my beefsteaks. Now, as far as plum tomatoes and all this, we did a lot of canning last year for tomatoes. So I still like my tomato sandwiches and I still like my salads. So I'm still going to plant beefsteaks. Now, whether I'm going to do the whole part beefsteaks or half beefsteaks and then use the other half maybe to fill in with some beans or onions or whatever, I'll decide that when it's time to plant. But I'll still germinate enough seeds to cover 1/6 of my garden and to keep the plants like 20 inches away from each other, which is, it takes up a lot of room when you start spreading them out, right? So anyways, that's going to be my main garden here. So now I harvest all my garlic. Okay, it's July, late July. I pulled out all the garlic. I got all my garlic bundled up, and it's all braided. Everything's braided. Now it's hung, and now it's drying. Well, I cannot waste, August, September, and October, 3 months, with having nothing here. So I'm going to plant. What I'm going to do is plant for my late planting. Okay, I'm going to plant beets. I'm going to plant turnips, radish, and all my greens, right? All my different types of lettuces I'll plant. I might throw in a couple of early, I'll probably put them with my onions. I'll probably save a couple of spots in the four corners for Romanian lettuce or iceberg lettuce just to get me going right away. And then in the late 1st of August, I'll plant some more over here for the late season, right? So that's what I'm going to do. Peas, well, I'll tell you something. 2022, my peas cost me a lot of time and a lot of my personal effort to keep them going and to grow them. And when it was when it was over, we only had enough for maybe a bowl of peas for the wife and I, like one, maybe 2 meals. It was just not feasible to plant them again. They are just too cheap to buy and too expensive to grow, as far as I'm concerned. I have them here for peas. I'll probably put maybe one line of peas, and I'll have 2 trellises that I never used, so I might put one up at the edge here and see if my peas will grow. But I think I might fill the garden here maybe with beets and turnip, have maybe the 4 corners have some lettuces and herbs, but I'm not too sure yet. But that's what I'm planning on now, because last year at both sides of my garden, I had pots that had all my herbs in it. They did okay. We harvested them, we dried them, we put them in jars, but we didn't get what we wanted. Same as our where we planted all our dill over here. Yes, we got dill, but nowhere's the amount that I needed to do all my pickling. So I'm going to try doing bucket gardening. I'm going to use some buckets and small pails, and I'm going to place them also around areas of the garden. And I'll probably start my beets and turnip in there. I'm going to put all my herbs in there. But I'm going to put a bucket with just my parsley, a bucket for my sage, a bucket for my rosemary, a bucket, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to have each bucket mixed. Each bucket will be its own variety. That's what I plan on doing. And as far as cherry tomatoes, instead of putting them with my beefsteak, and last year I had all my cherry tomatoes in here with all my beefsteaks in the middle rows, I'm not going to do that, because last year when I planted my strawberries, I didn't want to really harvest strawberries last year because it was my first year. So the wife and I kind of just let them go and cut off all the flowers. So whenever we were looking and weeding and all that, we'd cut off all the flowers to give the plants strength to grow for its first season. Then this winter or this fall, we covered this whole area with mulched leaves, okay, from my maple tree. And so this year, I'm not going to plant anything else in here. I'm going to concentrate on the strawberries and get them as pure and as nice as I possibly can. So as far as my cherry tomatoes, I'm going to put them in buckets this year. So I plan out my garden like this, right? Now, now that I do that, I got to really think about last year. What gave me problems last year? Well, last year was the frost. So I got a new tarp. I showed that in one of my videos, the new tarp that I put on, so I still have that. But I ended up having a mouse or two or three of them little mice or moles, okay, the small moles, and they actually put holes in my tarp. The tarp was all folded and put away, and they're on my garden. I had it beside my garden for the first until probably July 1st, right? Just in case I'd have more frost, I could just roll out my tarp over top my garden. But because I had them rolled up at both ends, ready to cover the garden, I guess a couple of moles and mice went in and ate through it. So when I did finally unroll it, I ended up with about 20 holes in my tarps. But you know what? Tarp's thick enough, got some holes. I learned my lesson. So this year, I'm going to find something different to get rid of my mice and moles, which I did. Now, another problem I had was groundhogs. Okay, I ended up with two groundhogs that made camp in my yard under one of my sheds, and they destroyed my yellow beans. They destroyed, oh my God, over half of my spaghetti squash. Like they just ate and ate and ate to the point where I lost over half my spaghetti squash and half my beans before I was able to get rid of my problem. So now the wife and I did some research, and I don't want that problem no more. So we're going to plant lavender, and we're going to plant a lot of lavender throughout the garden, okay? Throughout this one and throughout the edge of this one, we're going to put lavender. Because lavender, okay, will bloom from, let's say, June all the way through to August. But the smell and the pungent smells of that plant will keep away mice, it'll keep away moles, and it keeps away the groundhogs because they have very sensitive nose, okay? Very, very sensitive. And they do not. The worst thing, they just do not like lavender whatsoever, all right? But also they don't like the oregano, the thyme, the rosemary, sage, and mint. But lavender, that's a big deterrent. It'll keep them away. So I'm going to make sure I plant lavender around my gardens. And then my oregano, thyme, rosemary, sage, and mint, I'm going to put them in big buckets, but short, maybe 5-6 inches, but big enough. And I'll put that all over the place. And like I said, I'll grow one herb in every bucket, right? So that's what I'm going to do. So now what I look at is, where did I write that down? Right here. Okay, so now again, I'm doing my germinating, right? So like I talked about before, I look at from the time you take your seeds and put it in your pods, how long does it take to germinate? Then once it germinates and starts getting a sprout, how many days does it take after that when you plant it in your garden before you can harvest your fruits and veggies or whatever, right? So you got to really think of that because of what you're planting. Now, so what I did is I took, let's say, my peppers, right? So my peppers, from the time I plant my peppers as a very mature plant, okay, and I mean a mature plant, to the day I start harvesting the fruits is from 75 to 90 days. That's what it takes, 75 to 90 days. But if I plant seeds, like that's what I have, all I have is seeds from last year's garden, it takes from 100 to 150 days to harvest. Well, that's a long time when you live in Northern Ontario and you don't have that much heat, because all you have is July and August and part of September. That's it. You know what I mean? So you have 80, maybe 85 good days, and that's it. That's all you have. I don't care what anyone says. I know I've been gardening here for 27, 28 years, so I know how long it takes to grow all this stuff as an open garden. Like, I mean an open garden, right? I'm not talking greenhouses. I'm not talking anything like that, eh? So that's why what I did is I started to count back from the time I plant how many weeks, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 16 weeks, so I could start germinating my plants. That way when I do put my plants in my garden, then I'll know I will have 150 days or 100 days of good hot temperature or warm temperature for my plants to all mature and start producing their fruits, right? Because believe you me, in the years past, I planted stuff in my garden that was so beautiful and so nice, but then frost came, started killing everything off, and I got no fruits out of it, because when I finally looked at the back of the little packages, it was 120 to 130 days of harvest time. Well, I didn't get that many days of nice weather, you know what I mean? There's only 30 days in a month, right? So I didn't have 4 or 5 months of good solid weather, because I don't plant until the end of freaking June. So anyways, that's something you got to think of, all right? Now's the time you have to plan your garden, because if you just go out in the spring and say, oh, let's get my garden done, and then start tilling everything, you know what I mean? If you go and start to till everything, I know I got to till this, because I tilled this in the fall, and I tilled this in the fall, and then I planted my garlic. I tilled this and left it. I covered all this with my leaves, and I flooded this with leaves. Well, this will not change, because now come spring, when all my snow is gone, well, then I'm just going to use my fingers and lightly take all my leaves out of here and put them in my main garden here. Then I'm going to rent myself a tiller again, because I went and sold my other tiller, and I'm going to re-till this again this year. Even though I tilled it before the snow falls, I'm going to till it again before I plant. All right? So I'm going to do that. Then I'm not going to turn around and say, okay, now that that's done, what am I going to plant? And then spend the next 2 weeks and just throwing seeds and buying plants and just sticking them in the ground and saying, okay, there you go, there's my garden. Because you're going to have problems. You should always, always take the time in the fall or in the winter and plan what you want to do and then do it. All right? But this year, I have some help. And I'm going to show you that in 2 minutes. I'm just going to set it up and we're going to take a look at it. So I'll be right back. Now this should have the 2 mats, thermostat, everything. Okay, so what do we got here? The mat's 20 inches by 40 inches. 48 inches actually. So it's a big mat. Got the controller. You could program it. It's got all the information right on the mat itself. It tells you your best germination between 75 and 80, 70 and 85 Fahrenheit, which is good. Between 24 and 30 Celsius. Now this here also has a probe. So when you plug her in, all right, and you got all your rack on here with all your seeds in all the pods, just pick anywhere, any pod you want and put in the thermostat reader. And this here go right in the soil, and it'll maintain the heat and bring that soil up to temperature, because it's an automatic shutoff. It'll maintain that heat. You don't have to worry. It's not one of them mats where you plug it in and it's one consistent temperature the whole time it's on. Them mats are okay. They're inexpensive, but some seeds need different temperatures to germinate. All right, and then you can program it here. But what's good about this is when you insert this into the into your pod, into your earth, and you want to keep a constant temperature of 73 degrees, you program this to 73. It will not go lower and it will not go higher. So that's why I purchased this mat here. Okay, so when I do set this up, I'm going to have my plastic trays sitting on it. All right, and inside the tray, it's going to have all my pods with all my seedlings. All right, I'm going to keep the earth at the proper humidity, the proper wetness, insert the probe, and we're going to see what happens. This should save me a lot of time in starting the plants for my garden. So, where I bought this was at Amazon. Now, this here costs me actually 102 Canadian dollars shipped to my door. And it's for one mat, the controller, and that's it. Now, you could buy 2 mats, you could buy 3 mats, 1 mat without the controller, but I figured, you know what, 48 inches. Okay, so it says 20. Oh yeah, it's 20 for sure. It's actually 20 and a half. It says 48 inches. It's actually 48 and a half. So there you go. You get it. And what's good is all the instructions are right here. So that should help. And you know what? That's a good investment, because for years, what I've been doing is germinating my seeds, okay, and keeping it on top of a rad. And whenever I got time or the weather permits, I put it beside my patio door, open my curtains, and use the sun rays to help heat up my soil. But you know what? That took a lot of effort, because keeping it uniform at a certain temperature was very tough. Now it won't be. So this should help me in germinating all my plants. All the information is here. Also, I got a PDF file that gives you all your seeds for the different types of vegetables and the germination rate at certain temperatures all the way across. I'm also going to try and put that in the video. So anyways, this is step 1. Planning your garden, getting everything ready, giving yourself a blueprint, something to work with. You got to do that. It makes it so much easier than just going on a whim and going to the store and saying, man, what do I want to plant? Well, let's grab this, let's grab this, let's grab this. Let's throw in these seeds, let's buy these seeds. And come home, throw it in a bunch of pod with a little bit of water and hope for the best. This here will also give you better results. So good planning, good setup, spend a couple of dollars, get yourself a mat, and it'll help in the long run. Thanks for dropping by. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment. Tell me what you guys do. Do you guys have a mat like this? Or do you just put it by the sunlight by one of your windows? Do you got a greenhouse? How do you guys start your garden? What do you guys do to plan? Leave it in your comment. Anyways, thanks for dropping by, guys. Take care. Later. Bye now.